Well, welcome once again to Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet. And from my perspective, the unexpected part is what makes it the most fun. We get to do all sorts of unexpected things from time to time, and we'll see what happens with our guest this week, Abby Stason, who is a master teacher and is very much involved in dealing with the world of humanity and being very concerned about people. And I don't want to give any more away because I think it'll be a whole lot more fun to hear it from her. So Abby, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just lit up also when you said unexpected. The unexpected happens when we're inclusive and we don't know what's going to happen. And that's where the interesting stuff happens.
Yeah, it's what makes it the most fun. I love telling a story about one person that was on our podcast a long time ago now. Gosh, almost 2 years ago. He was a software engineer, and he lives in Southern California in an area called Dana Point. Loves to swim in the ocean. And he, while we were talking, talked about the fact that he went in the ocean once in the winter. And he decided after that he was going to swim every chance he got in the ocean, whether it was winter or summer. And I asked him about being afraid in the winter. And he said, well, it was a little bit daunting the first time I went into the water. It was 55 degrees. And he said, I noticed that the closer I got to the water, the slower I moved. And I wasn't sure I wanted to do this. And then he finally just said, I'm going to bite the bullet and do it. And he jumped in. He said it was only a couple seconds. He was used to it. And he's been swimming in the water, even in the winter, without a wetsuit ever since. And he swum nose to nose with dolphins and other things like that. So he's had a lot of fun doing it. But then that led to a 10-minute discussion between us on the whole subject of fear, which is not anything that either of us anticipated talking about. So the unexpected is definitely a part of what we do.
Yeah, and I applaud him. I would need a wetsuit to do that. Yeah, to overcome my fear, I'd need a wetsuit. And, I appreciate you always in the discussions we've had and how you hold it. This is an inclusion and diversity can be a heavy topic, but I appreciate how you hold it lightly and, let's have some fun, because if we take it all too seriously, that's when we get a little bit in our own ways.
Well, yeah, I think the problem also is that people take it, I won't say way too seriously, but they take it in a way where it ends up really being much more divisive or non-inclusive or less diverse. I just had a conversation with someone who is a guest on our podcast, and we were talking about disabilities. And I said, the biggest problem that I see is that people with disabilities are not really included in the conversation in so many different ways. We don't talk about disabilities. We don't talk about people with disabilities, and we're left out. And I said to him, one of the things that I've heard from a few people who have been on experts on diversity is, but disability it starts with dis. It's not it is not the same. And my point is disability exactly is the same, because every single person on the planet has a disability. And reality is, so disability starts with dis. So does disciple. So does discrete. So does discern. And yet we don't regard those in a negative context. So the reality is we can reevaluate and change how we view some of the words that we use. And as I've indicated to people on this podcast as well, every person on the planet has a disability, and I could make that case very, very well. We won't spend a lot of time on that here, but I could make that case and point out that everyone has a disability of some sort.
I would echo that. That's well said, actually, and I'm pretty appreciating what I'm learning already, of course. But yeah, agreed. And can we just see each other as humans? We're all humans.
Disability really needs to be viewed as not something that a few people have that makes them less than us, but disability is a characteristic that manifests itself differently, but for everyone. And the argument that I make is most all of you are light dependent. And from my perspective, that makes you awfully disabled compared to me because I don't have to worry about whether the lights are on. And the reality is, though, that your disability is covered up by light bulbs and by so many other ways that light on demand is made available today. And that's fine, but don't knock the rest of us just because we don't happen to have the problem that you do when you think that you're superior because you can go turn a flashlight on or start a flashlight on a phone if power goes out. That works only if you have the device. And so your devices cover up your disability, but doesn't change the fact that it's there.
Yeah. And society tries to tell us what ability or disability is. What if we just flip those?
Yeah.
What if we just flip those? Because that's where we have to get past societal conditioning. Who decides who's disabled or not? I mean, yeah, we're all human beings. If we can look past the surface to see that we have, we're all the same. And yeah, to get past societal conditioning on who we say is better than, less than, or what the expectations are, and how we set up our lives and systems around that. I think it's a good inquiry and a good investigation and something for us all to continue to talk about and to bring to light.
Yeah, I think it is something that's very important to do, and hopefully more of us will do it over time.
Yeah, well, that's why what you're up to is so important, and you inviting me into this discussion and others into the discussion. You're leading the way with it, so I appreciate being here, and I'm proud to be sitting here next to you over technology.
Well, thank you. It's good to have this opportunity and get a chance to visit. Tell me a little bit about the early Abbey, growing up and all that stuff.
Yeah, the early Abbey. Wow, that's
the early Abbey. That'd be a great TV. That's a great title for a TV or radio show. The early Abbey. I was watching on TV, looking at a guide, and there was a show, and my wife and I used to watch it, The New Adventures of Old Christine. So we can talk about the early Abbey.
The early Abbey. There's a bit of, it's a bit of excitement, a bit of drama, a bit of sadness. But, I was born and raised, and I'm not going to go through my entire lifespan here.
Whatever you'd like to.
Yeah. I was born and raised in New Jersey. And, from a very early age, I knew that, one thing that I always loved is the truth. I loved hearing the truth, no matter what it is, whether it's, I'll use these words, good, bad, or whatever. But I love the truth. And I noticed that people around me didn't love the truth. Mm-hmm. So at times I had I was active, I had a healthy life and all that. But one thing that throughout my lifetime, which I'm bringing this up because it brings me to today, is that I was penalized for telling the truth. It wasn't popular for telling the truth, and I really struggled with that. I mean, I'm a privileged person, and I always had an internal disconnect with that. But I love the truth no matter what it is. And I find myself today now just getting very excited about the truth in myself, when I screw things up, to the truth in what's happening anywhere, to the truth around inclusion and diversity. So it was I pretty much compacted myself and didn't align with who I was because it wasn't always comfortable to tell the truth. Because, I'm LGBTQ, I'm a woman. So, if you're in an environment where being a female, you're suppressed and you try to tell the truth about what you want, or if you try to tell the truth that you're in love with someone of the same sex, that was penalized. So I really struggled as a youth trying to tell the truth. And so today we come full circle. I'm just, the truth is it for me. I love the truth. So, admitting when I make mistakes and telling the truth about that, to the truth of what's happening in the world or any of it, and not calling any of it good, bad, right, wrong. And I spent, 20 years on Wall Street, and you can imagine truth telling.
Talk about truth, yeah.
Yeah, so,
or lack thereof.
Yeah, right. Truth telling in Wall Street was something of kind of like avoiding the truth. A little bit the corporate world can be, lifted to an art form. You know what I mean? So that's why I always kind of grappled with that. And that's one of the reasons I left, was to really start telling the truth. And what it comes down to is being more conscious, in essence.
Where in New Jersey are you from?
I am from, a very small town. Everyone says, now everyone listening on this is probably like, she doesn't have an accent, although some people will pick up slight traces of some.
I can hear a little.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're probably picking up on it. I'm from a very small town in Warren County, New Jersey called Belvedere.
Okay.
It's right on the Delaware River.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
I lived in Westfield for 6 years.
Oh, great. Yeah, so Westfield. So you know Belvedere, and some people, it's not like Newark for the viewers listening in. It's the farmland of New Jersey. And, we used to go sleigh riding, and lakes would freeze over and we'd go ice skating and all that. We never locked our doors, went to the shore every year.
What's really funny about Westfield for me is that before we moved there, we had selected property and then chose to build a house because my wife was in a wheelchair her whole life. And so we chose to build a house because if you build a house, it really doesn't cost a lot more for access than it does just to build the house. If you buy a house and modify it, it costs a bunch of money.
Yeah.
The only extra expense we had was that it had to be a 2-story house because that's what the development had. So we did spend $15,000 extra dollars in the construction of the house to put in an elevator. But beyond that, it didn't cost more. But still, when we were, once we selected the property and we were back in California telling people where we were going to live and all that, I had never heard of Westfield before we went there, but I was amazed at the number of people who knew about Westfield, New Jersey here in California.
Well, so when it then fast forward, I was working in Lower Manhattan, after 9/11, which, obviously, yeah. So I lived in Summit, New Jersey.
Ah, okay.
So I lived in Summit, took the train to Hoboken, and then took the ferry over to the
ferry, yeah.
World Financial Center. Yeah.
What did you do on Wall Street?
I was in sales leadership. Basically in charge of brokers, if you will. Help, supporting them, hiring, firing, helping clients with issues, anything you can imagine.
So you must have had a lot of fun dealing with people and the truth from time to time.
Well, it was. So everyone's on the call will probably stereotype me a little bit in being on Wall Street, and that's quite all right because it's the stereotyping is a little bit truthful, yeah. But it's an exciting industry. Yeah, it's got a little bit of its warts on it. One of the things that was really tough was being a woman. So I left Wall Street in 2010. So I was 19 years on Wall Street. It was pretty tough to be consistently the only woman in the room. So I really had to take care of myself and, meet kind of the challenges that came with that. Sometimes it'd be my meeting and I'd be asked to get coffee because I'm the female, or I'd be asked to take notes because I'm the female. So that got a little bit tiring, but I never became a victim of that. It's easy to get victim-y. Any of us in an underrepresented group of any kind, it's easy to go to victim. But I chose not to do that. That's
really the issue, isn't it? It's a matter of, are you going to be a victim or not? And that's, of course, what happens so often is that we seem to learn to be a victim rather than recognizing that we don't need to be. We discover for all too often that people just decide to be a victim and they don't need to be a victim.
Yeah, it's because we are a little bit victims, but there's an essence of going to victimhood, unnecessarily. So it's rather than whining about it, it's understanding that this is the reality that I live in, and so how can I meet this? How can I take care of myself? How can I respond with ability versus reacting? And bringing in other underrepresented groups. I mean, certainly you come across that same type of, we just talked about disabled people and, there's Black people and, underrepresented groups. It's easy to go to victim, but I encourage people, and I never got victim-y about it. It's just like, this is the reality I live in. What can I do? And how can I spark a greater discussion? Are people available for a different discussion around this? If not, okay, but just keep going.
Well, it gets back to the whole thing we talked about earlier about disabilities and so on, because so many people, like people who are blind, specifically people who become blind later in life, grow up sighted and in an environment that says you're not whole if you can't fully see. And all too often, they end up being victims or view themselves as victims and don't recognize that, okay, so they're still traveling down the road of life, maybe in a different lane, but you're still going down the road of life, and you can learn to do and choose to do all the things that you could do before. It's very rare that there isn't something that a person who is blind can't do that a person with eyesight can. Probably blind people aren't most likely going to be football players.
Right.
However, being football strategists is another story.
Yes.
And so sometimes exactly what we do changes. But on the other hand, like I said, the whole issue of light dependence, I'll put my ability to understand a lot of my surroundings up against what most people can or don't do in terms of understanding their surroundings, because people don't learn to really observe, whereas it's part of my way of life.
Yes, and it's an opportunity, too, to ask, how can I cultivate resilience? You know, if I can use any situation to strengthen my resilience, then that's, talk about having fun. I'm not making light of any situation, but if I can cultivate more resilience and learn, I matured really quickly. You know what I mean? I grew up really quickly, which was delightful.
Right.
It was delightful. And, I want to say, too, that working on Wall Street as a leader was extremely satisfying so people are people. So one of the things I love doing is human development. So I got to do that a lot on Wall Street. So I was really pleased with my ability to impact people's lives, even on Wall Street.
Well, and the reality is that the people on Wall Street, by and large, were very intelligent, very creative, very bright people, and had some real challenges and pressures to live up to in order to do the things that they do. So I can understand where the environment developed from, although as you point out, the issue of getting people to grow and recognizing that a female can do things as well is something that some people accept and some people don't. But that's not just Wall Street. That, unfortunately, is a guy thing that has to change.
Well, I think it is. It's a guy thing. And it's, we all can change to see, we are just human beings, because actually gender and race are just social constructs, actually. A lot of the social conditioning that comes with anything that we stereotype has a lot of baggage to it, can have baggage, and we're not aligned with ourselves, and we're trying to fit into society's mold. And conditioning is useful, but if left uninvestigated, it's not as much fun. Right? Because we can see this wants to change, but yet we keep doing the same thing, and that's just stuckness. I
was watching a commercial last night about, this woman comes on and she's talking about Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in baseball, but he was not the first baseball player of color, if you will. And it talked about the Negro League, and that there's a whole podcast about that now, which I haven't listened to yet, but I can relate to being different than most people. And also I'm well aware of the Negro League, which it was called, and appreciate it and look forward to learning more about it. Because I believe talent is talent wherever it comes from.
Yeah, and this notion of, can I be true to myself no matter what? Can I be really true to myself, with who I am? And can I be real no matter what? And in some places, to be real means I will scare the heck out of people, for the biases. If I show up as a strong female, that's the success likability bias, is negative for women and positive for men. So then I start scaring people. So then I need to stay conscious to that, to see how I'm being received, and where's the conversation headed, and how can we connect beyond?
Yeah. How do we help people grow?
Yeah, that's right. It's an opportunity. That's really well said. It's an opportunity to stretch and grow.
So what did you do after you left Wall Street?
Well, so going back to what I was saying, what I loved doing was, I got results because you want to have positive results, and disciplined business practices takes care of the day to day. But what I really loved doing was leading and developing people, mentoring, coaching, developing human beings. I have no problem developing someone younger than me, them going off to be a CEO and work for them. So I decided to follow that passion. I was in the Bay Area, wanted to stay. So I leapt, took the leap. I leapt off the cliff and started my own practice of basically teaching. It's more of a teacher than a coach. I basically teach people skills around everything we're talking about. You talked about fear earlier, et cetera. But that's really satisfying for me because that's what I love to do. I consider myself a constant learner.
And where do you live today?
Now I live in Oregon.
Okay.
I'm in Southern Oregon.
So that's a little bit away from Wall Street.
Yes, it is.
It's a long walk, but that's okay. That's okay. So you, and what does your business do today?
Yeah, so basically I teach people skills. I do one-on-one sessions, I do team workshops, I help companies with their cultures and team workshops. I have an e-learning platform. I have a whole curriculum that I teach people skills, specifically skills to navigate the human condition. You were just talking about, and I listened to that podcast about the gentleman at Dana Point. It was really interesting. So like him, overcoming his fear. Well, we have fear throughout the day. So fear is a big driver of our behavior. So that's something that I teach is how to overcome fear. And, in short, I'm sharing my journey for my own development, my own human development. Here's what I've learned. Here's the skill I've learned. And here's what works for me. And also clients kept asking me questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? So finally, one client said, I don't want another catchphrase. I want frameworks. I want skills. I'm like, you got it. Here I am.
Well, and the fact is that if you really look at fear, most things that we fear or are afraid of never come to the light of day. They're not real. We're really good at creating fear out of nothing, and it really is nothing. And we don't step back enough, or we don't learn, as I describe it, how not to be blinded by fear, especially when it's unexpected things that come up that can really be perilous. Those are the times that we really need to keep our wits about us. And the reality is we can do that.
Yeah, yes. And you're right. Humans are, I call wackiest species on the planet. We are great. And we are the wackiest. I put myself at the top of the list. I mean, we will, this is the mind-body connection. We will actually create a fear response in our physiology based on some story we're telling ourselves.
Yeah.
We know this scientifically. So it's like, why would we ever do this? Like, I'm looking at you, you're in your home. I'm looking at me, I'm in my home. We're both safe. There's no reason for us to be fearful. We get along great. But what we do is we make up stories in our head, and then we go into a real fear response, and then our behavior comes from that. We know why that is. It's exciting. We live in exciting times because we know now. I get very excited, as you can tell, is we know now, as opposed to even 10, 15, 20 years ago, how our brains and our biology impact our behavior. Like it's no more a mystery to us. And we're going to just continue to get more and more informed about that, including why we exclude people and why we treat people of different colors or disabled people differently. So I think we're in an exciting time.
Well, and the reality is that most of the time that we treat people differently is because we don't understand. And to some degree, or for some people to a large degree, we don't want to understand. We don't want to be as people would say, confronted with the facts. Don't confuse me with the facts. That's what I believe is what I want to believe, and there are issues with that really should allow us to move beyond it and recognize that we all have gifts. As I've said, the thing is, disability does not mean a lack of ability, and disability is truly a characteristic that we all have that manifests itself in different ways for different people.
Absolutely. And, when you see someone who's disabled, someone who's different than you, we immediately go into us. Our brains go into us versus them. And then we also assign all of the behaviors of those biases that we've been taught, whether they are accurate or not. So I'd love the reframe you were talking about earlier about, disabled people. They really have abilities, but we have stereotypes about disabled people. We have stereotypes about women. We have stereotypes about men. We have stereotypes about blacks, any of it. And it's all just this old wiring, which I find exciting because we can actually rewire that.
Yep. Unfortunately, we grow up learning one way to wire, and it is something that we can change, and we should change.
Yes. Yes.
It's also a growth issue because for years people thought what they did about disability or people who have disabilities. And the fact is that as we evolve, hopefully we recognize that our own views are not really necessarily totally accurate, and we should change them and be a lot more inclusive than we tend to be.
Yes. And this is where being conscious and aware of myself as I see someone who's different than me requires me almost to stop and pause for a split second to interrupt any kind of conditioning that comes in. So this is where we can make more space for humanity. And it doesn't mean slowing down. It just means stopping and saying, okay, I'm looking at this person. What are the stories I have running? What are the biases I have running? And can I let those go and make different associations or be open to actually get to know this person before I make any judgments about them?
Yeah.
So that interrupts the brain wiring, and I love our brains. If we didn't have conditioning, we wouldn't be able to live. If we didn't have social conditioning, social conditioning is useful. For instance, we have stop signs and street lights and other norms that really help us get through our day to day. We wear uniforms. Imagine walking into a hospital and seeing everyone dressed like ranchers. I don't know, people like, cowboys.
You mean they're not?
Yeah, right. You'd walk into the hospital and need treatment and be like, wait a minute, I'm not in the right place. And you would go into a fear response. That's why we have uniforms and some other norms. But when those norms keep us from really connecting is when it's problematic. And we're seeing that. Well,
this concept that you talk about and that you address regularly about being real, what got you started down that road and deciding that was a really important thing to do?
Yeah, great question. This word authentic, I don't think people know what it means to be real or to be authentic. And if it's sometimes dangerous to be real or authentic in some communities. I'm thinking some places where women, if you want to be real and take off, don't not cover your face, that can be dangerous. That's the extreme form of it. Mm-hmm. But really, it's aligning your inner experience with your outer expression. It's knowing what your values are and standing for them. It's aligning with your commitments in the world and who you want to be. So I don't think people know what it means to be authentic. It means to be, exposed for the truth of who you are. But that, context matters also. It's not in a vacuum. But I think it's helpful to know really what it means to be authentic. It means that I'm not hiding myself from you, that I'm transparent. Now, I don't walk up to someone and just say, here's my life story. But,
right.
I think when we're authentic, We're revealing what wants to be revealed when it wants to be revealed. We're not wearing some persona, some mask. We are aligned with who we are. We know what our values are and stand for that. It's about, being congruent, living and leading or whatever in alignment with what you profess to stand for. So if yeah, go ahead.
Are we taught not to be authentic?
Well, I'll say the answer to that, I think, is yes. I mean, are we taught not to be authentic? I think we're not taught anything. We kind of grow up and we inherit, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. We grow up and inherit perhaps values from our parents and don't ever, when we start to get to adulthood, really ask, well, who am I? Are these just values of my parents? And yeah, there's social pressures to act certain ways. So we adopt those rather than saying, do I want to adopt these? Am I working in the right place? So we're not taught really, we're taught to go along to get along. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of what we're taught to go along to get along at the expense of ourselves. And I'm not saying we should fight against everything, but I think there's an opportunity for us to, be in the truth of who we are and align with our own values and what's true for us. And also, the brain is wired to go along, to get along, so it can be very fearful to go against what a group is saying. So that can be challenging for people, even though it might be healthier for whatever's happening.
But, the reason I asked about being taught, it may or may not be volitional, but when I look at, very frankly, look at politicians and how often they will deny something. They can be caught doing something or having done something. And sometimes that goes to extremes. Nowadays, you could do something 30 years ago and still be chastised for it and drummed out of the Corps, if you will. But the bottom line is that all too often politicians will just deny with the hope that, if I push back hard enough, then people will believe it didn't really happen. And the result is that, in fact, they did something. And that teaching or that activity teaches so many others, especially kids growing up, if they can get away with it, why can't I?
Yes, exactly. That's really well said. Politics is a great example of where you rarely hear the truth. And also we're, as humans, we're really not wired to speak fact to fact. I mean, we don't really speak fact to fact. In other words, we don't get on this Zoom call and say, you have headphones on, I don't. We just don't talk that way. Like, you have a gold shirt on, I have a blue shirt on. That's not how we communicate as humans. The brain is wired to contextualize everything. That's okay. But then understanding that what comes out of my mouth is my opinion, it can be a judgment and intuition, and that's okay too. But we treat some of these things that we see on the news as facts when it's an opinion. So then you can take the opinion in and either agree or disagree with it. But we say that that's the truth.
Well, and sometimes we hear something, say, on TV that is an opinion, or it's not even a good opinion because it clearly goes counter to reality and to facts.
Yes.
And yet people still say it. And if they don't get caught somehow, then it stands. And a lot of people call it gospel. And that's unfortunate because what they're really counting on is that most of us don't ever go into an analytical mode where we really look at things and say, is that opinion? Is that true? I should really look into that for myself.
Right. And herein lies the suffering and the challenge of being a human being, to take responsibility for, am I treating that as truth? Am I investigating? Am I doing my own, due diligence? Now, I'm not saying we should go and all become scientists or anything like that, but certainly you can tell an opinion when you hear it, but a lot of people, this is about being unconscious. It's just, I'm not making anything good, bad, right, wrong, but there's consequences to not challenging anyone, and particularly our politicians and leaders, elected officials, and anyone, and challenging each other to lift humanity into, again, the truth and the facts of the matters. And also inviting people to say, hey, that's not exactly true, but, let's take a look at that, but we consider things as truth. And then we take that and and you're alluding to that, is that then we take action based on something we think is true.
Or sometimes people will say, well, you said that, but that's not what I have experienced or what I've observed. Right. But that's fair. It's fair to then have the discussion.
Yes.
And it may very well be that both sets of experiences are absolutely valid and, if you will, true. Although it is so tempting to say, you can't handle the truth, but we won't go there. That's a different movie.
That was a good impression.
I actually was somewhere, I cannot remember when, it's been several years. I love movies and lines. And I was talking with someone and they said, look, all I want from you is the truth. And I couldn't resist. So I said that you can't handle the truth. And it really busted up the whole atmosphere. And people were able to talk a whole lot more seriously after that. And of course, there was another time I was somewhere and somebody said, surely that's not the case. I said, well, yes, it is. And don't call me Shirley. But as I said, movies. But,
that's from Airplane.
That's from Airplane.
Don't worry. I'm tracking. I'm totally tracking with you.
Oh, yeah. What can I say? I love to personally inject humor where I can. And I think that we take things so seriously sometimes. But the reality is truth is important and authenticity is important. And I guess I'd ask you, why is that the case? Why should we really be authentic?
Well, first of all, it's more satisfying on an individual level, so that when I'm aligned with who I am and I'm telling my truth, that is my experience and what's true for me, it's much more satisfying. Here's the other thing, it avoids a lot of drama. It opens up connection. It avoids drama. It takes away the blaming, shaming. If we really make truth the primary goal, then actually we have, in the time we spend in drama and arguing, we have more time and space to enjoy ourselves. But it's when we don't tell the truth, our self-esteem takes a hit. So, yeah. Right, when I'm not telling the truth and align with who I am, and I'm not authentic with myself, standing for what I prefer, behaving in a way that about what I profess to stand for, my self-esteem takes a hit. Now, if my self-esteem takes a hit, and we're all doing that, our collective self-esteem takes a hit.
I also would submit that not telling the truth or not being truthful is stressful, and yes. It's a lot harder to do. Some people learn to do it very well, unfortunately, but it doesn't change the fact that in general, it's a lot harder to do because you always have to worry about, am I going to be caught?
Yep. Spot on. And then it's like, okay, well, I lied. So then I have to cover up the lie. And then so then I have to build on the lie. It's a lot of unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
And the truth can be really inconvenient. That's the other thing. The truth can be absolutely inconvenient.
Oh, sure.
So, and then that might mean I have to rearrange some things in my life if I tell the truth, or, if I, this is the thing too. So here's the other thing: society isn't compassionate when we're all human beings and we make mistakes, right? We do harm others and we make mistakes, but society is not forgiving or compassionate. It doesn't make it cool to raise your hand and say, I really screwed this up. Here's what I did. I take responsibility. I want to clean this up, and here's what I've learned. But instead we blame and shame, and particularly in an era of social media and everything now visible. We just blame and slam anyway, the cancel culture. So we don't make it easy to tell the truth about screwing up and then recovering from that, because I think there's a lot to learn when, even these politicians that make mistakes, or any of these high profile people, everybody makes mistakes, but we slam them and just try to blame and shame them and just annihilate them, instead of saying, well, what happened? What was your experience when you were doing that? Or what have you learned? Where do you think that comes from? Right. What's coming to mind, I'm going to say it just because it's here, is when Will Smith slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. And I'm thinking, what an opportunity to sit there and say, okay, what happened? What did you learn? Instead, it just blew up into a ton of drama.
Yeah.
So we miss out on opportunities to grow our humanity by, if anyone wants to tell the truth. It's hard because you'll get slammed. Literally, you can be canceled, you can lose your job, all of that. And sometimes that's appropriate. I mean, there should be consequences. I'm not saying, when you tell the truth, some people might have to go to jail, and that's part of their taking responsibility. But overall, what we're talking about is the day-to-day things that happen that we could really benefit more from learning rather than blaming and shaming, in my opinion.
What do you think society really says or believes about being real?
Oh, gosh, yes. Society's, it's my experience. Society says, be real as long as it's what we say real is. So you should go along to get along. Look, I'm LGBTQ. I happen to be bisexual. There's 300 plus pieces of legislation against gay people. There's X number against transgender people. Now you're saying that now society, the government, is saying to me, you shouldn't do that, so we're going to write laws against you. So this is where it gets tough. I want to be real, but this is where intelligence comes in, context comes in, and I also say self-care.
Yeah.
Self-care. I'm teaching, especially now that I'm teaching women and anyone in an underrepresented group, self-care has got to be non-negotiable, because it's swimming upstream. And I'm not victim-y, but let's get in the reality of that. You have to take really good care of yourself.
You have to be the first to take responsibility for doing that, because no one else is going to.
Well said. You should repeat that. And that should podcast. If you're listening to this, that's the main message from this. Repeat that.
You have to be the one to do it, because no one else is going to. You have to take care of yourself, and that's absolutely fair to do. And I would go beyond it to say you need to really learn for you what self-care is about. For a person who is blind, let's say, who has become blind, who has grown up with an attitude that blindness is less than being able to see, now you're suddenly confronted with it. What does that mean self-care-wise, as opposed to, say, someone who is LGBTQ in terms of their sexual orientation? But the reality is that both do have things that they can do to care for themselves mentally and physically in order to be able to continue to function. And first, recognize that they are just as much a part of humanity as anyone else is.
Yes, I just was quiet because that was well said, very well said. So I hope everyone listening in, you just go back, repeat what he just said. Just repeat it, because you'll listen to it over and over. That's the core message of this podcast right here. And I'll add, I'm looking at you. I can see you have gray hair. I'm turning 58 in a few days, so now ageism starts to come in, right? So, I'm 58. So if I act, society says I should act like a 58-year-old. So I have big energy, as you can probably hear in my voice. I'm pretty active, and I'm not really intimidated by getting older. Yeah. I certainly don't act as energetic and athletic as a 25-year-old, but society says I should act a certain way in my age. So going full circle to your society question. Yeah, I think it's a time to examine our societal conditioning and ask what's outdated.
Yeah, and the reality is that things become outdated because we learn, which we should do, and we recognize that some of our basic core beliefs that we were taught aren't necessarily really so.
Yes, totally agree.
Yeah, and it is still something that we do need to and should learn to deal with. It's fair. Again, I talk a lot about blindness, of course, but that's what I tend to know a little bit about anyway. But I know that the views that people still all too often have are very outmoded. I still hear of people who are losing their, well, let me do it this way. I hear about people who go to ophthalmologists because they don't see as well as they used to, and the doctor says, well, you're going blind, there's nothing I can do, and the doctor just walks out of the room. Or the doctor says, go live in a home because you can't do anything anymore, you're going to be blind. And that's not real.
Yeah, wow. That's right there. That's really, well, I feel offended just hearing that. I feel offended just hearing that. It's not inspirational. It's not looking at possibilities. It's not helping anyone. It's
not true.
Yeah, and it's not true. That's right, because we can all do things.
Well, the reality is that we have, having been in the World Trade Center and escaping on September 11th, the reality is that proves that anyone can be in an unexpected situation, and it's a question of how we choose to deal with it. Of course, a lot of people tell me, well, you must have been so afraid, or, of course, you didn't know what happened because you couldn't see it. Well, excuse me. The couldn't see it one is really easy. I was on the 78th floor on the south side of the building, and the airplane hit on the area between floors 93 and 99 on the north side of the building. Basically 18 floors of concrete, steel, and everything else between me and where the plane hit. What was there to see? Nobody could see it. And when we were going down the stairs, none of us knew what had happened. I never really learned what happened until both towers had collapsed. And I called my wife, and she is the first one who told us how 2 aircraft had been crashed into the towers. Now, we knew that something was going on because one of my colleagues saw fire before we evacuated. So we knew that something happened. And then as we were going down the stairs, we smelled fumes from burning jet fuel, but we had no idea what really had occurred. And there was no way to know. But I was the one who observed to people around me, I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. And other people said, yeah, we were trying to figure out what that is. That's what it is. You're right.
Yeah. And your hearing, I'm imagining, is very strong, right? The brain will make up for loss of sight.
Well, only if I use it. And that's a good question. But the reality is only if I learn to use it. Your hearing doesn't become better simply because you lose your eyesight. It's like you take a person from SEAL Team 6 and you take someone from some other profession that doesn't require as much eyesight. They're not going to see the same. One will see better than the other because they've learned to use their eyesight. And it's the same thing with hearing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, I notice I'm thinking of you and the towers, and what an experience. And it's a privilege to sit across from you right now. I'm just, it's amazing that you were there and lived through that. And I have a special type of feeling for the people of New York. And, I worked in Lower Manhattan after it was 2004 to 2006. And that's one of the reasons I went to work in Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, is to, I don't know, I felt drawn to go there and just be a part of that. And it was a privilege to work there for 2 years after all that had happened. And
where were you before then?
I was in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
Yeah, I was in the Southeast. And
okay.
I was offered a job in same company, Meryl Lynch, and I was offered a job in Lower Manhattan. I just felt like, I felt called to go and do that. And mostly because of 9/11. It was like a privilege to work with people who had lived through it. And, like it's a privilege to sit across from you. It's, of course, one of the most recognizable, impactful events in the U.S. ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm putting that lightly. I'm not even giving it justice.
But it is one of the things that we learn to deal with, and that's okay. But the reality is that I think even with that, September 11th is, for a lot of people, just history. I mean, you've got a whole generation who never experienced anything relating to it, and just reading about it, it's like Pearl Harbor for a lot of us is just history. Unless we take the time to really step back and think about it and internalize it. Now, I love to collect old radio shows as a hobby. So I've heard many radio broadcasts, not only about Pearl Harbor and that day, but other things relating to World War II and so on, that make it very real, and have learned to use my imagination. And I hope people will do that regarding September 11th as well. Because even though maybe you weren't born yet, or for those of us who were born, who were able to remember it, but only saw it as whatever the size of our TV screen or our newspapers were, it's important to internalize that and think about it and decide, what does that really teach us about history? And I don't think it does teach us that Muslims are evil or anything like that. I think it teaches us that there are thugs in the world who want to force us to try to bend to their will. But the reality is that we're stronger if we work together, because after September 11th, just the way this country behaved for a while, then unfortunately we started to see things like MCI WorldCom and Enron and other things like that. Politicians who really lost all the momentum that we had gained after September 11th.
Yeah, and I'm really appreciating, really, you said it really well too. Kind of a summation is, we don't internalize our experience. So we skate over our direct experience, whether the experience be astronomically stressful and traumatic like 9/11, but you still don't want to skip over your direct experience.
Mm-hmm.
We don't internalize our experience. We interact superficially, and we just say, oh, that was okay. This was great. That wasn't. This was awful. Rather than really getting into our direct experience. That's where we can build resilience. That's where insight and wisdom comes along, like you just said. Yeah, really well said. Appreciate the wisdom I'm getting today. On this, I always learn something. I'm like, I wonder what I'll learn today. Well, here we are.
I hear you. Me too. I figure if I'm not learning at least as much as anybody else, then I'm not doing my job very well, because I love doing this podcast, because everyone who comes on teaches me a lot, which I value a great deal. And then putting it all together is a lot of fun.
Yes.
So, tell me a little bit more about what it is you do today and what's your company and so on.
Yeah, so my company name is my name, Abigail Stason LLC. Really, the nuts.
Very creative name.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's just was easy, easy, and got recommended to me. But
hey, it works.
In a nutshell, everything we're talking about is coming full circle, because people want to show up. People want to be real. They want to be authentic. They want to be pleased with how they show up. They want to know what their values are. So it's like navigating the human condition in our modern world, in a global gig economy, requires skill, right? Okay, if I have an experience, what does this mean for me? How am I treating people? That requires skill. So I basically teach skills on how to navigate the human condition, particularly while relating to others. It's one thing to be skillful when I'm by myself, but what it's like when we start working as a team and launching a product. You're shaking your head, right? Yeah.
We impress ourselves very easily, don't we?
Yeah. That's where, so we, and it's important today as opposed to years ago when we worked on assembly lines. We're well past that.
Yeah.
But working on an assembly line, you didn't, you basically said hi to your neighbor. You didn't have to share ideas and wisdom. You didn't have to collaborate with them. So now
Right.
everything in the workforce today, in a gig economy, a global gig economy, across cultures, right? Across languages. So what's required of us is to be skillful human beings. So I have a curriculum that centers around that. So I do that in a one-on-one forum, team workshops, open workshops, retreats, you name it. Anyone who wants to learn how to behave more consciously. And I'm not making it good or bad, right or wrong.
Right. How do you do that? How do you teach skills?
Oh, like literally, so I'll, I have framework. I talked about frameworks. So I have a skill like presence. I teach a framework on what it means to be present. Emotional intelligence is a skill. And I just feel like I'm laughing because emotional intelligence is necessary. It's non-negotiable for resilience. We know this scientifically. If you're not emotionally fluent, you will hurt your immune system. But people don't know actually how to feel their emotions. So I teach people that, to notice the sensations in their body, to then capture the wisdom from that. How to speak the truth, right? We've talked about that. How to listen, how to cultivate self-esteem. So I have processes, mini processes, if you will, for each skill. It's just like, look, let me simplify it for you. Everybody's got a hobby of some sort.
A hobbit?
A hobbit. So some people might have a hobbit. I have 5 out here in my closet. So, but everybody has a hobby of some sort. Well, let's say, so I was a runner. I used to run. I didn't go out and run a marathon in the first minute. What did I do? I learned how to train, right? So it's just like that, except we don't do strength training for our behaviors.
Yeah.
So it's repetition. It's a workout, if you will.
What kind of suggestions do you have for people who want to get real, who don't necessarily know how to get real, especially people from underrepresented groups?
Yeah. So for that, I mean, you look me up at abigailstason.com. I mean, I'm happy to help anyone. But with underrepresented groups, it's particularly more important. So that the skills there are knowing when I'm present, knowing when I'm emotionally intelligent, because you're going to be, especially if you're an underrepresented group, because of what we talked about, you'll be criticized for being real. So you have to understand your emotions. You have to know what your values are. You have to know what you stand for. And I will add self-care because of what we talked about. Because as an underrepresented group, we're swimming upstream. So you have to really understand how to take care of yourself, because we need to be strong as underrepresented groups. And I'll go back to my days on Wall Street. I was, I was swimming upstream, So I was, okay, how am I doing this week? Am I taking care of myself? Each of those is a skill.
How do people do all of that? So, when you talk about these are the things that one needs to do, how do they do that?
How do they do that? Actually,
So how do they learn about self-care, for example, and so on? How do they learn about being more confident about themselves?
Yeah. Okay. So, you can get support. So you can, one, I'll say you can buy my book. I mean, abigailstason.com. My book is called Evolution Revolution, Conscious Leadership for an Information Age. So I have the skills in them that actually teach you how to be, again, how to learn what your values are, how to thrive. I have 5 buckets of thriving: spiritually, mental, physical, emotional, and financial. And I have a worksheet, so you can actually fill out the worksheet to see where you're thriving or not, and what bucket you need to, correct for. Where are you doing in each bucket? So it's not abstract. It's just like if you're learning how to play tennis, you pick up a ball, you pick up a racket, and you start hitting it, right? Well, just like this, you pick up a worksheet, you fill it out, and you examine what's true for you. And then you put it into practice.
and important to do. And in our cover notes, we have a picture of the book cover and so on. So I do urge people to look at that and get your book to really understand a lot of the insights. And I think that that's the issue, is that the ultimate answer, I would think, to my question about how do people do it is you ask questions. You go to people like Abby who have the information and listen to them. You figure out what will work for you, but really take the time to figure it out, and then you can put it into practice.
It's a matter of stopping to investigate what's going on with me. How am I doing? And where do I need support and all of that? And all of that, it's skill. It's my experience, and what I teach is we can be more skillful human beings. It's a complex world now.
Do you think it's more complex than it used to be?
I think we make it complex.
Okay.
That's what I happen to think. It's my experience too. And this is what, notice what I'm saying. It's like, it's my experience. Here's what I think, it's my opinion and my experience. Notice how I'm saying the truth is XYZ. Notice how I'm saying that. Right. It's my experience. It's my opinion that we make it complex. But yet the skills that I teach, they're simply said, but they're not easy. Right. And it's a challenge of a lifetime.
Well, I think there's a lot to be said for all that we make it a complex world. Is it really more complex than it used to be? Maybe not. We tend to want to think that it is, but is it really? Has the real dynamic, have the real basic concepts changed or not? And that's really the issue. And that's why I agree with you that we tend to want to make it more complex. Oh, yeah, and there is a lot going on. Things like social media and other things bring us closer together and so on. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. But we're the ones that have control over that. Right.
And well said, because we can go back to take a responsibility for our part, right?
Right.
How am I showing up on social media, et cetera?
Well, if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
Yeah, they can go to abigailstason.com.
Would you spell that, please?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's ABIGAILSTASON.com. You can email me at Abby, ABBY, at abigailstason.com. And if you're interested, if anyone's interested who's listening in, a good place to go is go to my website, abigailstason.com. Go to my blogs. That's a good way to pick up a lot of these information. I don't send out I don't flood you with emails. Come to my blogs. It's a good place to get some exposure to some of this. Pick up my book, Evolution Revolution, Conscious Leadership for an Information Age. And I have an online course too, a self-study course that you can sign up for. It's only $250 that walks you through each chapter. I made it priced at a price point to get the skills in as many hands as possible.
Cool. Well, I hope people will do that. I think there's never anything wrong with doing good skill building and growing and stretching. One of the things that I've talked about it a lot on this podcast that I've learned to do over the years is to spend a little bit of time each day thinking about what happened today. How did it go? Yes. Why did that not work? Why did that work? And even when it worked, could I have done it better? And what can I learn from everything that I do? I just think introspection is a beautiful thing.
Yes, and I want to stress what you said at the end. And what have I learned about myself? That's a great summary. Your process right there. Listeners, follow that process. Absolutely.
I've learned. I used to talk all the time about listening to my speeches because as I travel and speak, I like to record them, and I've always said I'm my own worst critic. And so I listen to speeches because I'm my own worst critic, and I'm going to learn from that. What I realize is how negative is that? And I've learned that what I really should say is I'm my own best teacher, and I will learn from it. And I just think I think we need to look at the world in a more positive way. And even the things that aren't necessarily working right, we can be more positive about what we do.
Yeah, so notice the reframe of that. Instead of putting yourself on trial, it's simply what did I learn and how can I grow? That's it.
And that's the way it ought to be.
Yes, yes. And look, it's way more fun, right?
It's a whole lot more fun.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's like, okay, I put myself on trial. Well, here's what I did and what did I learn and how can I grow? That feels like a lot more fun.
And with that, I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you all for listening. This has been enjoyable and fun. We've been on here over an hour, and time has passed, and it's been just like we just started. So I think it's great. I hope all of you listening enjoyed this, and that you'll comment to me about it. I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at Michael, Michaelhi, so Michael Hi at Accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast, and Michael Hingson is MichaelHingson.com/podcast. Wherever you can, please let us know your thoughts. I would love it and really appreciate it if you would give us a 5-star review for our podcast today and for all the podcasts that you hear from us. We love it, but we do want to hear from you. And Abigail, for you and everyone listening, if you know of anyone who you think would be a good guest for Unstoppable Mindset, love to hear from you. We want to really have people on who want to talk about stories, tell their stories, and talk about life, because that's what this is really all about. So once again, Abby, I want to thank you for being here. This has been absolutely wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure and an honor, really. Thank you.